At 49 years old, with exactly $200 in her bank account and a pile of bills she couldn't open anymore, Linda did something that changed everything. Not something big, not something expensive, something so quiet, so small, that the people around her didn't even notice at first. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Because before that quiet moment, there was a very loud kind of pain. The kind that doesn't announce itself. The kind that sneaks up on you while you're busy holding everyone else together. Have you ever looked around at your own life and felt like a stranger in it, like somewhere along the way you took a wrong turn, and now you're so far off course that you don't even remember what the right road looked like? That's exactly where Linda was. And if any part of that sounds familiar to you, I want you to stay with this story, because what she learned the hard way. And maybe, just maybe, you won't have to. Linda Patterson had worked in the same hospital laundry room for 22 years. Not the glamorous part of the hospital, not the emergency room with its urgency, not the maternity ward with its joy. She worked 3 floors underground in a room that smelled of bleach and hot steam, feeding sheets and gowns and towels into industrial machines that roared like something alive and angry. She was 51 years old in her soul before she ever turned 40. Life had a way of doing that to her. She grew up in a small town in rural Tennessee, the second of 4 children, the one nobody worried about, because she was the responsible one. She carried that title like a backpack full of stones. Responsible meant she stayed. Responsible meant she gave up her spot at the community college when her mama got sick. Responsible meant she married young, had her daughter Kayla at 22, and spent the next 27 years making sure everyone in her orbit had enough before she ever thought about herself. Her ex-husband, Dennis, had walked out 8 years before our story begins. Not dramatically, not with a fight. He just left a note on the kitchen counter that said, "I can't do this anymore," and took the truck. Linda found the note next to an empty coffee pot and a sink full of dishes she hadn't had time to wash. She cried for exactly 2 days. Then she got up, made Kayla's lunch, and went to work. That was Linda. That had always been Linda. Her apartment was small but neat, in a neighborhood that used to be decent and was working its way back. She had a little African violet on the windowsill she'd been nursing back to life for months. She had a photograph of Kayla at her high school graduation on the refrigerator, held up by a magnet from a dentist's office she'd stopped going to when she lost her dental coverage. Her dream, if you asked her on a good day, was small. She wanted to visit the Smoky Mountains, not live there, not move there. Just go. Spend one weekend in a cabin with a porch. Watch the fog rise off the hills in the morning. Eat biscuits she didn't have to make herself. That was it. That was the whole dream. She hadn't gone yet. There was always something more pressing, always a bill. Always someone who needed her more than she needed herself. The one small pleasure she allowed herself was her Tuesday evening walks. After her shift ended, before the ache in her feet became unbearable, she would walk 6 blocks down to the park and sit on the same bench for exactly 20 minutes, just to breathe, just to be somewhere that wasn't a machine room or a kitchen or someone else's need. That bench was the only place in the world where Linda Patterson belonged entirely to herself. The letter arrived on a Thursday. Linda had been ignoring the stack of envelopes on her kitchen table for almost 2 weeks. She knew what was in them. Past due notices, mostly. The electric bill she'd paid partial on. The medical bill from when she'd twisted her ankle on the wet floor at work and gone to urgent care. The credit card she'd used last Christmas to buy Kayla a decent coat because her daughter lived in Chicago now and said the cold was brutal. But this envelope was different. It was from the hospital's HR department. She opened it standing at the counter, still in her coat. Due to restructuring and the implementation of a new automated laundry system, your position will be eliminated effective 30 days from the date of this letter. She read it twice, then a third time. The words didn't rearrange themselves into something better. Linda had heard rumors about the new machines. Big ones, they said, could do in 2 hours what took her team all day. She had told herself the rumors were just talk. She had 22 years there. 22 years of never calling out sick when she could help it, of picking up extra shifts when a coworker's kid was in the hospital, of knowing every piece of equipment in that basement room by name. She sat down slowly on the kitchen chair. The chair creaked. Outside, a dog was barking somewhere. The refrigerator hummed. 22 years. $200 in the bank. 30 days. She didn't cry that night. She just sat there for a very long time, still in her coat, while the apartment got dark around her. The next morning, she called Kayla. She tried to keep her voice steady. She tried to say it like it was just information, just news, just a thing that happened. But halfway through the sentence, her voice broke, and Kayla was quiet for a moment, and then said, "Mom, just come to Chicago. You can stay with me and Marcus." And there it was, the impossible choice. Give up her apartment, pack what she could carry, move into her daughter's spare room at 49 years old, watch her daughter and her daughter's boyfriend navigate around her like she was furniture, apply for jobs in a city she didn't know, competing against people who were 20 years younger and hadn't spent the last 2 decades underground. Or stay in the apartment she could no longer afford, stay in a city where the only job she'd ever known was about to vanish, stay with $200 and 30 days and no plan. Both options felt like losing. She told Kayla she'd think about it. She hung up. She went to the window and looked at the African violet. It had 3 new blooms that week. She had been so proud of those 3 little purple flowers. Now she looked at them and thought, what am I even doing? What has any of this been for? 2 weeks after the letter, on a Sunday afternoon, Linda began to pack. Not to go to Chicago, not to go anywhere with a plan. She pulled out 2 big garbage bags and started filling them with things she didn't see the point in keeping. Old clothes, a bag of craft supplies she'd bought once thinking she'd take up quilting and never touched. The coffee maker Dennis had left behind that she'd been using out of practicality and hating the whole time. She was going through her closet, methodically, with the blank look of someone who has made a decision they don't want to examine too closely, when she found the box. It was a shoebox, taped shut, shoved behind her winter boots. She knew what was in it. Birthday cards, a few old letters, the only photograph she had of her grandmother, Mabel, who had died when Linda was 12. And underneath all of it, a small journal with a blue cover that she had bought for herself on her 40th birthday and written in for exactly 3 months before life got too loud to continue. She sat on the floor of her closet and held the journal for a long time. She didn't open it. She couldn't. Instead, she pressed it against her chest like you'd press a hand to a wound. She cried then, not the quiet kind, the deep, ugly, private kind that you only let out when you are absolutely certain no one can hear you. The kind that comes from a place so far down you didn't even know it was there until it finds a crack in your carefully built surface and comes flooding out. She cried for Dennis leaving, for the college she never went to, for the Smoky Mountains she'd been waiting to visit for 12 years, for 22 years in a basement, for the coat she bought Kayla with a credit card, for the $200, for the 3 purple flowers on the African violet, for all the years she had been responsible and what it had cost her. When there was nothing left, she sat in the silence of her closet floor and thought, I am so tired. I am so deeply, completely tired. She thought about calling Kayla back and saying yes, not because it was right, but because she was too tired to think of anything else. She sat there until it got dark. She didn't call Kayla that night. Instead, she did something she hadn't done in months. She put on her jacket and walked to the park. It was late October, cold enough that she could see her breath. The park was almost empty. The leaves were mostly gone, and the few that remained on the branches were the stubborn ones, the ones hanging on past the point when it made sense, brown at the edges but not yet ready to let go. Linda sat on her bench. There was a woman already at the other end of it. Linda almost turned around. She didn't feel like company. She didn't feel like smiling or nodding or doing any of the small performances of civility that 2 strangers on a bench are expected to exchange. But something kept her there. She sat down on her end, pulled her jacket tighter, and looked at the empty fountain in the middle of the park. The woman was older, maybe 70 or so, small-framed, wearing a heavy coat the color of old copper, white hair pinned back neatly. She was knitting something, her fingers moving with the automatic confidence of someone who has been doing the same thing for 50 years and no longer needs to think about it. They sat in silence for several minutes. Linda was grateful for the silence. Then the woman spoke, without looking up from her knitting. "You've been sitting on this bench for years. I've seen you." Linda looked over, surprised. "I come on Tuesdays, mostly." The woman nodded slowly. "I come on Sundays." A pause. "You look different tonight." Linda didn't know what to say to that. She looked back at the fountain. "I got laid off," she said, before she could decide not to, "after 22 years. The woman didn't gasp, didn't say, "Oh, honey," in the way people do when they want to be kind, but don't know what to do with someone else's pain. She just kept knitting and let the quiet settle back between them like a quilt being spread over a bed. After a long moment, she said, "What did you want to be before? Not, what are you going to do now? Not, have you thought about looking for another job? Just, what did you want to be before?" Linda felt something strange move through her chest. Not quite grief, not quite relief, something in between. "I wanted to go to school," she said. "I wanted to study nursing. I wanted to see the Smoky Mountains." She gave a short, self-deprecating laugh. "I wanted a lot of things." The woman finally looked up. Her eyes were dark and steady, and completely unhurried. "Which one of those is still possible?" Just that. Just 4 words wrapped in a question. Linda opened her mouth to say none of them, out of pure reflex. But the words didn't come. The woman looked back down at her knitting. "Wanting isn't the problem," she said quietly. "Waiting for everything to be perfect first is the problem." Linda stared at her. "Start with the smallest one," the woman said. "Not the biggest, the smallest." The needles clicked softly together. A leaf fell from the tree above them and landed on the bench between them, and the woman reached over without looking and let it fall to the ground. "Whatever's stopping you," she said, "it's not what you think it is." They sat there a while longer without speaking. When Linda finally looked over to say goodbye, the bench was empty. The woman had gathered her things and left in the quiet way that small people in heavy coats sometimes do, without ceremony, without announcement. Linda sat there alone for another 10 minutes. Then she went home. That night, Linda didn't pack another garbage bag. She sat at the kitchen table and opened the blue journal to the first blank page she could find. She wrote one thing. What is the smallest possible thing? And the first lesson arrived not as a thought, but as a memory. She remembered the African violet. When she'd found it, it was nearly dead, dropped off by a neighbor who was moving and didn't want to bother. Every leaf was yellowed, every stem was limp. And Linda had looked at it and thought, I'll try one thing. Just water it and put it in the right window. Not a whole program, not a rescue mission, one thing. 3 months later, 3 purple flowers. She hadn't saved it by solving all its problems at once. She had done the one small thing that was possible, and then the next small thing, and the plant had done the rest. She understood, sitting at that table, that she had been waiting her whole life for the conditions to be perfect before she allowed herself to want anything. She had been waiting to be out of debt, waiting for Kayla to be settled, waiting for the right moment that had never come and was never going to come on its own. The second lesson came a few days later. She went to the hospital's HR office to ask about the severance package, expecting to feel ashamed, expecting the same low-grade invisibility she had felt for 22 years down in that basement. But instead of sitting quietly and taking whatever they offered, she asked to speak to a supervisor. She asked about the continuation of her health insurance. She asked about the job placement resources the hospital advertised in their employee handbook. The HR woman across the desk looked slightly surprised. Linda felt slightly surprised herself. She had never asked, not like that, not with the steady voice of someone who knows they have a right to the answer. And what she learned in that room was something she could not have been taught in a classroom. Asking isn't rude. Staying silent is just expensive. The third lesson arrived in the most humiliating way possible. She had called a local workforce development center, the kind of place with free resume help and job training, and gone in for an initial meeting. She had dressed carefully. She had felt, for the first time in weeks, a small thread of hope. The intake coordinator, a young woman with perfect nails who looked like she had graduated from college recently, and everything had gone according to plan, went through Linda's work history, and then paused and said, with a kind smile that somehow made it worse, "So you don't have any certifications or degrees? Nothing beyond the high school diploma?" Linda heard the question the way it sounded before the politeness was applied to it. Her face went hot. She felt the 22 years in the basement pressing down on her all at once. Every sheet she'd folded, every gown she'd fed through a machine, every shift she'd picked up, all of it suddenly looking, in that fluorescent lit room, like evidence of something she hadn't intended to confess. She said, "No, no degrees." She drove home and sat in the parking lot of her building for a long time. But then she went upstairs, and she did not get back into her closet. Because somewhere between the park bench and that parking lot, something had shifted. The shame was real, but it was not the whole truth, and she was finished letting incomplete truths make her decisions. The fourth lesson was about time. She had always thought of her age as a deadline. 49 felt like a door that was mostly closed. Like the window for becoming anything other than what she already was had been sealed shut by all the years she'd spent being responsible for everyone else. But she started looking into CNA certification programs, certified nursing assistant, because it was adjacent to the nursing she'd always wanted. It was achievable in months, not years, and it was real. And what she found was that the average age in the evening class at the community college was not 22. It was closer to 38. There was a woman in the information session who was 53 and had just left a marriage of 26 years and said, with the calm of someone who has made peace with a hard decision, "I'm doing this for me. First time for everything." Linda sat next to her and thought, first time for everything. The fifth lesson emerged slowly over the course of weeks in the small choices she started making. She stopped apologizing for what she needed, not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, in the private language of daily decisions. She kept the African violet instead of leaving it for the next tenant. She told Kayla with love that she was not coming to Chicago, not because she didn't love her daughter, but because she was going to stay and try. She started walking to the park not just on Tuesdays, but whenever she needed to. She was learning, slowly and imperfectly, and with setbacks she hadn't anticipated. That taking care of herself was not the opposite of loving the people around her. It was the foundation. The 30 days ran out. Linda moved to a smaller apartment, 2 blocks away, that cost $250 less per month. It had no African violet shelf by the window, so she made one out of a board and 2 brackets from the hardware store. $6 total. She enrolled in the CNA evening program. The first week was brutal. She was exhausted in a way she hadn't expected, not physically but mentally. The effort of learning something new after so many years of doing the same thing, feeling like trying to use a muscle she'd forgotten she had. She almost dropped the class twice. Once after a particularly difficult lab session involving medical terminology she kept transposing. Once after a classmate half her age got every answer right on a practice quiz, and Linda got 6 out of 10 and sat in her car afterward and cried. But she did not drop the class. Psycho Emotional 4, the unexpected reversal. 4 months into the program, something happened that she had not seen coming at all. Her instructor, a retired ER nurse named Patricia, who had the manner of someone who has seen everything twice and judges nothing, kept Linda after class one evening. Linda braced for bad news. She was already composing the internal apology, already preparing to explain why she was slower than the others. Patricia said, I want to talk to you about something. Have you ever thought about going into patient advocacy? Linda blinked. The older patients, Patricia said, studying her. They respond to you differently than they do to the younger students. You talk to them like they're people, not like they're a condition to be managed. That's not nothing. That's actually quite rare. Linda drove home that night the long way around. She didn't want to arrive anywhere too quickly. She wanted to stay inside that sentence for a while. You talk to them like they're people. It had never occurred to her that the thing she was most naturally, the thing she had been her whole life, the person who noticed when someone was struggling, who sat with people in their hard places, who asked the right question or said nothing, and let the silence do its work, could be something valuable in a professional setting. She had only ever thought of it as just the way she was. In the 6th month, she completed the program. She was 50 years old, 3 days past her birthday, the morning she passed her certification exam. She sat in her car in the testing center parking lot and looked at the result on her phone and said, out loud, to no one, "Okay then." She called Kayla. Her daughter cried harder than she did. "Mom," Kayla kept saying, "Mom." "I'm okay," Linda said, and for the first time in a very long time, the words were entirely true. She started working in a rehabilitation center 8 weeks later. Not the job she had always imagined, not yet, but a real job with real patients, with a window in the break room that showed a tree. She made more per hour than she ever had in 22 years of laundry. She had her own pair of scrubs with her name embroidered on the chest pocket. She went to the Smoky Mountains that fall. She sat on the porch of a cabin on a Friday morning and watched the fog come off the mountains and drank coffee she hadn't made herself and cried. Just a little, the good kind. The following spring, Linda was on her lunch break at the rehabilitation center, sitting in the small courtyard with a sandwich she'd actually had time to make the night before, when she noticed the woman by the door. Late 40s, wearing the look that Linda recognized before she could have named it. The particular combination of held together and barely holding together that she had worn herself for years. The woman worked in the administrative office. Linda had seen her around, but they had never really spoken. She was sitting very still, staring at the ground, holding a phone she wasn't looking at. Linda almost walked past. Lunch break is lunch break, not her business. She sat down next to her. "You okay?" she said. The woman looked up, and her face did that thing faces do when someone asks the right question at the wrong time. It almost crumbled. "Not really," she said, with a laugh that wasn't a laugh. "Okay," Linda said. "You don't have to be." They sat there together for a moment. Then the woman said, all in one tight exhale, "I've been in the same position here for 11 years. I thought they were going to promote me. They gave it to someone else, someone younger. And I know that sounds small, but I'm 47 and I feel like I missed something somewhere, and I don't even know when it happened." Linda nodded. She didn't say, "I know exactly how you feel," because that is a thing people say when they want to make the conversation about themselves. She didn't say, "It'll get better," because sometimes that lands like a dismissal. She said, "What's the smallest thing right now, today? What's one thing that's still possible?" The woman looked at her. Linda waited. Somewhere behind her, a bird was making its case for spring. "I've always wanted to go back to school," the woman said slowly. "Finish my degree. I never did." "Okay," Linda said. "There's your answer." They sat a while longer. When Linda got up to go back inside, she paused. She thought of a small woman in a copper-colored coat, knitting in the cold, and what it had felt like to be on the receiving end of a few quiet words at exactly the right moment. How something that small could redirect a whole life. She turned back. "You're not too late," she said. "You're also not who you were 11 years ago. Give yourself credit for that." The woman looked at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, something in her face settled. Not solved, not fixed, but settled the way a coin stops spinning and finds its face. "Thank you," she said. Linda nodded and went back inside. That afternoon, as she was helping an elderly patient do his exercises, he looked up at her and said, "You always seem like you know something the rest of us don't." Linda laughed, surprised. She thought about the park bench, about the blue journal, about the CNA exam, and the Smoky Mountains, and $6 worth of brackets. "I just figured out it was okay to be a beginner," she said. He looked at her with the particular wisdom of a man who has lived long enough to know when someone is telling the truth. "Better late than never," he said. "Better late than never," Linda agreed. "And here's what I want to ask you before we say goodbye today. Have you ever been standing in your own kitchen, holding a letter or a phone, or just a moment of honest silence, and thought, I have given everything I have, and I still feel like I have nothing of my own? Have you ever put yourself last for so long that you forgot what first even feels like? Because if you have, I want you to know that you are not behind. You are not too old, not too late, not too broken. You are exactly where Linda was when she sat on that bench. And look where she went from there. So here's what I want you to do right now. Go to the comments and write this, DIA1, and then tell me the one small thing you are going to do today, just for you, not for your kids, not for your boss, not for anyone who needs something from you, just for you. I want to read every single one of those comments. I mean that. And if this story touched something in you, if you heard something in Linda's journey that you needed to hear, then please stay here with us. Hit subscribe and turn on the bell. Every single week, we bring you a new story about a real woman who went through something real and came out different on the other side. Not perfect, not wealthy, just more herself than she was before. Each time you give this video a like, you help it reach one more woman who is sitting in her kitchen right now, holding a letter she can't open, wondering if the window has passed. It hasn't. Share this with her. Take care of yourself out there. You're someone's reminder that it's not too late.